We begin the current Daf, Mesechtas Nedarim Daf Samach Tes. We begin 5 lines down from the top of the Yomid, where the Gemara continues with another question relating to this sugya of the Hafaras Nedarim. This like the title of this parak Naimar Asa, which was saying that there's a halacha besides that of the previous parak about Taras Nedarim. There's Hafaras Nedarim, that of the husband and the father having the ability to be made for the neder. So the Gemara continues to ask certain analytical questions regarding this procedure of what's called hakama, either substantiating the neder or hafaras nedarim, that of nullifying the neder. Shir corresponds to Bekazich and Cheskel. Turn to Daf Chaim. I'm joining with today's daf. Some things discussed in today's daf are yesh she'ela behekim. If let's say the husband or the father does hakama, which means that he's substantiating the neder, could he be shoyel on that hakama? Could he undo that hakama just like you could be shoyel on the neder? Could you be shoyel on the hakama? And what's with Yeshayel Ba'afara? If you nullified her vow, could you shoyel on that hafara to undo that, which then would then give the ability for the hakama of the neder? What's with in a case of you say, Kayim lechi, Kayim lechi. So the husband says, it's mekuyim for you, it's mekuyim for you. He says it twice. Now, we know obviously you can't be mekayim something twice. It's mekuyim once, it's already mekuyim. It's already substantiated. But the question is, if you say nishalal hakama, and he asks on the first hakama, undoing that, would you say now, chay hakama shniya? Would you say the second hakama is okay, now it's going to take effect, and therefore there is going to be hakama? Then we get a little bit more complex. We have a question as follows. It's going to be an interesting question as the way the Ram is going to explain it. You say, kayim lechi, umufa lechi. Says, okay, maybe he's like a little flip-flop. He's saying, okay, I'm mekayim this neder for you. Then he says, and it's nullified for you. But then he says the following words. I don't want there to be a hakama unless there is hafara. So as we'll see in the Ram will explain there's no question the hakama is not going to take effect. The question is going to be, will hafara take effect? Lamais, you said kiyim first before mufar, but then you're saying there shouldn't be hakama unless there is hafara. So that's going to be the question, is hafara going to take effect? Which that's going to relate to a machlekes Rabbi and Rabbi Yisi, which is brought elsewhere in Shas, which our Gemara is going to bring regarding harizu tumuras oila tumur shlamim. Someone says, this behind a regular chulin animal, let it be a tumura of oila, tumur shlamim. What is the status of that animal? What halacha of tumura does it have? Is it purely oila? Is it oila and shlamim? And what would be the fundamental principle of why it's going to be that? And the Gemara is going to relate that back to the question of the case we just described. What's what if, let's say you say, kayim umeifr lechi, these two opposite ends of the spectrum, substantiating or nullifying it, bevas achas. At the same time, ma would the halacha be in that case? And the Gemara is going to relate that to a principle of that, what's called koshein b'zachar zeh, afil bevas achas einay. Whatever cannot be one after the other, which obviously you can't have hakam lafar, then even at the same time it's not going to be. Some important principles we're going to discuss in today's daf that come up are ein afar lachar yom shamay. You cannot nullify after the day that you heard it. It could only be on that day that you heard it. And in a kama achar kama, you can't have another akama after you already had one akama. In a kama achar afar, you can't do a kama after you were made for. There's no neder to be mekayim. You already made for it. And in afar achar kama, neither can you be made for after you're mekayim because you already substantiated. You wouldn't be able to do that of hafar. So begin the current daf samach tes, 5 lines down at the top of the Yomid. Says the Gemara, Bayi Rava. Rava has the following question: Yes, she'ela behekim. Is there a halacha of she'ela, which is you go to the Rav and you tell him, look, I've charato, I didn't mean this. So if he already substantiated the neder, and he comes that same day, obviously that same day, because after that day it's already done. He comes that same day, and he asks, regarding the I was mekayim, my wife's neder, could I be made for it that same day, because I'm undoing my hakama, or in sheila behakim, or there's no sheila, but again, tomorrow would be obviously cannot be made for, because that's not any less than even being quiet. So even if you undid your hakama, by being quiet for a period of 24 hours is already by itself hakama. So we're talking about that same day. An hour later, you have charat, you come to the Rav, you say, I regret having done this hakama, could I be undoing it? That's question number 1. Says the Gemara what's called imtim tzaloima. Based on this principle, if you're going to say, yes, sheila behekim, that you could ask and undo the substantiating of the neder that you did for your wife, okay. Now I have another question. Yes, sheila behefer? Would you even say that you could ask and undo this that you were made for her neder? Or ain't sheila behefer? Would you say there's no sheila behefer? So the Ran explains he says that, wait a second, you can't do she'el on a heifer. He says, I understand, but hakama is like a neder. Essentially, her neder, she said, I'm swearing I'm never going to Coney Island, never again. And he says, yes, I'm being makayim this neder of yours. So it's like substantiating, it's like taking a neder itself. But hafara, you can't undo a hafara. There's nothing there. You deleted, you remember by that mistake you make, I did it on Friday, you press something, delete, and then you're like, oh, I didn't mean that, and you just wiped away an hour's worth of work. There's nothing to undo of that. That's already undone. So, says the Ran, he says, even so, the Gemara still has the question, if the she'el behefer. You know why? For a certain specific reason. Because the Gemara later on of Ayin Vav Mebeis compares, there's a hakish of hakama to hafara. The pasuk says, "Isha yikimena ve'isha yifarana." The pasuk compares the two of them, like the Gemara says, whoever comes to hekim comes to hefer. If you cannot do hekim, you cannot do hefer. So he says that's why, says Duran, the Gemara is asking, if you're going to say the she'ela by hekim, what's the halacha by hafara? That's the Gemara's question. Do we say, although you're right, really there's no application of she'ela by hafara? Even so, we'll say there is she'ela because the Maisa, the pasuk compares hakama to hafara. And if you tell me you could do she'ela on hakama, you could do it on hafara. Or maybe says that says the Ran, the Gemara's other side of the question says, no, come on. For that, we're not going to compare hafara to hakama because you can't do she'ela on hafara. That is exactly what the Gemara's question is. Based on this hekesh, would the hekesh go that far to say something that really doesn't apply by hafara? And that's what the Gemara is going to conclude to show that you're right regarding she'ela. The hekesh doesn't apply because Tashma says the Gemara is being a ra'id amar b'yechanan. B'yechanan said nishalan al hahekem. You could go ahead and ask, come to the Rav, and you undo the fact that you were makayim the neder of the wife. But ve'ein nishalan al hafer. For that, the hekesh is not telling you comparing the two of them. Yeah, it's misha bolach lal hekem bolach al hefer, as we'll see later on Daf Vav. But regarding this, there's no she'ela on hefer. It's not possible. It doesn't make sense. And for that, the hekesh is not going to bring. Okay. Another question, says the Gemara, Bai Rabba. Rabba has the following question, or some say it's Rava, as all these questions seem to be from Rava. Bai Rabba. Rabba says the following question. Kayim Leichi. Let's say the husband hears the wife take a neder. She says, that's it, I'm not going to any more Sheva Brachas anymore. I'm done with this. I wasted all my time. He says, yes, I'm being Mekayim that neder. And he says again, Kayim Leichi. He says it two times. Kayim Leichi, Kayim Leichi. Okay. Now, v'nishul ala kamar we just finished saying from Rabbi Yochanan's teaching that you could be shoyel on the hekim, on the that you makayim the neder. He goes to the Rav, and in the first hakama, he says the first time when he did it, he says, I had charat, I wasn't really thinking so, I didn't think through the situation. The Rav says, okay, I'm being mater your hakama. Ma, what's the halacha? What's the question? That do we say, since at the time when you said the second hakama from your mouth, it didn't take effect because ein hakama ach hakama, you can't be mekayim something twice. So it was empty. It was empty words, had no significance. So that's it. It couldn't take effect. It's like you didn't say anything. Or do you say that although at that moment it didn't take effect, that's only because at that moment you already had the first hakama, which doesn't allow any room for a second hakama to take effect. But you said it, you did a hakama, and therefore if you can be shoyl on the first one, there's room for it to take effect. The double parked car is waiting to park. In some bar park, there's always one car waiting, triple park. It's waiting to park. Right, it's not parked, but he's waiting to park. So it didn't take effect, but the second that you're going to be shoyl on the first one, it will take effect. It says Gemara Tashma, it's being a raya to Amar Rava. Rava says, on Daf Yitzchesem at Aleph, we had that Rava said, regarding the Mishnah, if a guy says, I swear I'm not going to eat, I swear I'm not going to eat. So Rava said the following halacha. He said, obviously, if you already swore you're not going to eat, you already swore, so it's not going to be a second shvuah. He says, no. If you go to the Rava and you're shayla and you undo your first shvuah, shniya chalalav. The second shvuah is going to take effect because it was just mitlat talabakai. It was waiting to take effect. Here also, when you bishoyel on the first hakama, the second one will take effect, and therefore, since we said you could be shoyel on the hakama, now the second one is there waiting, and it will take effect, and there will be hakama. Now, here's where it gets the complex case that we mentioned. Boy Rabba. Rabba has the following question. Let's say the husband says the following words. He hears the wife take a neder. I'm not eating any more protein. That's it. It's a terrible thing. It ruins your life. I'm only eating veggies. That's it. He says, Kayim Lechi. Says, okay, I'm a kayim the neder for you. In which case, if he... Who, by that shvua? It's only one. He's shayil on the first one. Oh, then it can't take effect. In shvacha shvua, I mean, you can't two on the same thing I'm not going to eat. It's when you're shayil on it, then we say the second one's going to take effect. Yeah, that's what it seemed like. That's what I'm saying. Then when you're shayil on it, I mean, here we're talking about hakam or whatever. Right. Yeah, because you're already forbidden already. So then it's mishbun v'aimdin or whatever I'm saying. But then you shayil on it, then the second one could take effect. You sometimes could have two nadarim if they're different, if they're differentiated, if it's what's called issa moisif, or then you could have some other element taking effect on them. So this case is that he tells her kayim lechi, okay, I'm being kayim your neder of not eating protein, umufalechi. But he says, I'm nullifying it. Okay, and then he says, I don't want my substantiating of it to be taking effect. Only if my nullifying of it takes effect. What's the halacha? So what's the question? So the Ran explains, he tells us a little bit what really the question is over here. He says, for Rabbah it was obvious that hakama is not going to take effect. Why? He says what's called maman of shach. Either way you look at it, it's not possible. If hafar is taking effect, obviously hakama is not taking effect. Why? Because he says, although the Gemara tells us later on of Ayin Amud Alf, that we're not sure in the case of, let's say you say, I'm mekayim this for an hour, and I'm made for it for an hour. So the question the Gemara had was, would we say both would take effect or not? He says there it's different, because you gave a set amount. You said, I want the hakama to be for an hour, and I want the hafar to be for an hour. That's maybe where you'll have a question that you could have hakam and hafar. But he says over here, where you didn't give a set amount, you just said kayim lechi, and then you said umufa lechi, and then you said I only want the hakama to be if there's hafara. So he says it's obvious. If hafara is taking effect, hakama is not taking effect, like we explained, because he's saying that he only wants the hakama if there is hafara, and you can't have hakama and hafara at the same time. And if you're going to say hafara is not going to take effect, well then obviously hakama is also not going to take effect. Why not? Meaning if hafara is taking effect, obviously hafara is not, because you can't have both. And if hafara is not taking effect, well then you stipulated and you said that hakama should not take effect unless hafara takes effect. So it says the Ran, it was obvious to Rabbah that hakama is not taking effect. As we just explained, either way you look at it, if hafara is yes or not, it's not possible that it's going to be hakama. But the question was regarding hafar, and it's very important to understand it, because from the Gemara's answer, you'll see why it's so important for the Ran to qualify what the Gemara's question is. The question is specifically regarding the hafar. Do we say, since you first said, your first words were, kaimi lechi, and then you said, mufa lechi, sounds like that you're stipulating that the hafar should only take effect after hakama. That's why you said in that order. And therefore, hafar should not take effect unless you first have hakama. And that's why you stipulated and you said, and that's what you needed to stipulate and say, but I don't want hakama to be unless the hafar is going to take effect. Why didn't he stipulate the other way too? The guy obviously is one of these flip-flops. Why didn't he say the other way too? He didn't stipulate the opposite, that hafar should not take effect unless you first have hakama, because since you first already said hakama before hafara, so you're relying on the words that you said that I want hakama first, because that's the one I mentioned first. And there's nothing getting in the way of it. To the contrary, because he's concerned that hakama is going to take effect so much, it's not going to leave any room for hafara. That's why he stipulated and he said, I don't want hakama to be unless hafara is going to take effect. So it says the Ran, it's as if he stipulated on both of them, that hakama should take effect first and then hafara. And then he's saying, okay, but I want hafara also to be. So if hafara is not going to be there, then hakama shouldn't be over there. So that's tzad number one in saying that you're right, maybe hafara shouldn't take effect either, because he only wants hafara to be if hakama is there. and hakama ultimately is not going to be there. Or maybe you say that no. Although that he said umufa lechi after kaim lechi, it's not that he wants hafara to take effect after hakama, and that was his intention. No, you just simply can't say two words at the same time. But this person was more particular about the hafara taking effect, because that's what he says. He says, I don't want hakama to take effect unless hafara is going to take effect. And so what was his intention? His intention really was that they should take effect at the same time. However, because he was more particular that hafara should take effect more than hakama, he stipulates and he says that if the hakama is taking effect is going to hold back the hafara taking effect, then I'm revealing my intention that I don't want the hakama to take effect. But even though the effect of the hafara is going to be akiv the chalois of the hakama, why doesn't he stipulate? He says that he doesn't say that the hafara should not take effect. Why doesn't he say that? Because he wants hafara to take effect and the hakama not to take effect. So you see how we're analyzing his words. What did he really mean? You see, like when you come to a Shaila Torah, he doesn't take, you might think what you're saying is not so significant. He's analyzing over here. When this guy says, what does he really mean to say? He says, oh, I don't want hakama to be unless it's hafara. Yeah, but you first said hakama and then hafara. What did you mean by that? Did you mean that because you're saying it first so that I want this to be first and then, only then hafara take effect? But if there's no hakama and then there's no hafara, then okay, we can't do hafara because there's no hakama, because we said we describe why there's no hakama. Or do we say, no, he's saying two things. One of them he has to say first. But I'm stipulating, I'm showing you my main thing is hafara. And okay, if it's not going to be hakama, bye. I don't care. I want hafara to be. That's my main one that I want from the two of them. That's the Gemara's shaila regarding this question of this interesting case of kaim alechi and then mufa alechi, and then there shouldn't be hakama unless there's hafara. What's the halacha? As the Ran explains, is there going to be hafara or not? But again, obviously, there's not going to be any hakama. So the Gemara says, Toshemaz, we continue to Tomad Beis. Let's answer the question, Miplukta de Remei v'Rabbi. This is a machlokes that as we're going to explain the principle, they're really disagreeing in the same case. Why? What is this? That now we learned in the Mishnah Masechtas Tamura, Navchav Heyamad Beis. Mishnah says the following halacha. It's brought a few times in Shas that Hadezu Tamuras Ayla. Someone says, okay, this animal, this regular chulin animal, I want it to be a tamur. What's a tamur? A tamur is that you take a carbon and you say, okay, I want to transfer the sanctity of this carbon onto this animal. Now, as we know the halacha is, you can't do that. But the Torah says now both of them are going to have that sanctity. The carbon is going to remain the same, and this chulin is going to have the halacha too. Now, this guy says, I want it to be tamuras oila, tamuras shlamim, which obviously can't be both. But, so what's the halacha? So, harezu tamuras oila divrei Meir. Meir says, the first thing you said is the first thing it's going to be. It's going to be a tamura of an oila. He says, no. He says, Im lekachnes kavim mitchilam. If this was his intention from the beginning, what? To say both, oila and shlamim. Now, you can't say two things at the same time. One word's going to have to come before. We're not like Hashem. We can't say zacha b'shama b'dibur echad. We have to say one before the other. But since if that was his intention and you can't say two things at the same time, so then devadav kayamin, his words are substantiated. What does that mean? So the Gemara over there explains. Everyone agrees. If you would say, I want this one to take effect, and v'achakach, and then I want the other one to take effect, everyone's going to agree what's called tafas lashon rishon. You're going to go based on the first one, because once you said one, and then you're saying subsequently, v'achakach, obviously once it's already a tamuras ayla, it cannot be a tamuras shlama. Even Rabbi Yisrael would agree that you cannot have anything take effect after the tamuras ayla to become a tamuras shlam. Now, let's say you said, Loi tachalzu elam kein chalsuzu. Let's say he said, I don't want this one to take effect unless this other one takes effect. There, says the Ran from the Gemara over there, everyone agrees that both of them are going to be kaddish. They're both going to be holy. Why? Because over there, it's possible to be a tamuras shlam to take effect at the same time. How is that possible? How could it be? You can't have an animal half oil, half shlam. No, you let it graze till it becomes a blemish, and then you sell it, and you take half the proceeds to be an oil, half the proceeds to be a shlam. So those two extreme cases, no one's going to disagree that when it's a zach or zeh, that it will only be the first one, and when you want them both to be at the same time, it's going to be both of them. The whole machlekes was only in the case that we're quoting from that Mishnah. You said, Tmuras oila, Tmuras shlam. That's all you said. So Meir holds from the fact that you should have said, Temuras Oila Vishlamim, and this is very important about, as we'll see, the round's going to move back a little bit more about what exactly is the case. But he said Temuras Oila Temur Shlam. Now Rameh holds, since he should have or could have said Temuras Oila Vishlamim, and instead he says the extra word Temuras. He says Temuras Oila Temuras Shlamim. It's like he's saying, let this one take effect and then let the other one take effect. And therefore, as we quoted Rameir here on the third line of the Gemara, he says, okay, so it's going to be the first one then. Whereas Rabbi Yossi held that, no, it's possible that this that he's saying, Temuras Oila Temur Shlamim, is a mistake. He thinks, if I don't say the word Temur on each one, then the word Temur is not going to take effect on both of them. So therefore, we investigate him. If he says that my intention already from the beginning was that it should be both the word Oila and Shlamim, and that was always my intention, I just can't say two words at the same time, okay, then it's going to graze, develops a blemish, you're going to sell it, and half of its proceeds is going to be for an Oila, and half is going to be for Shlamim. Oh, okay, so what does that have to do with our sugya? What shaykhs? How are we proving from this to our question of this interesting case? So the Ran explains, so you see that the Machlekes Rameir and Yossi is dependent on what principle? When you say two different titles from your mouth. If we say that the second one will take effect after the first one, or that both of them should take effect at the same time, since it's not possible to say both at the same time. So therefore we say regarding our question as follows. According to Rabbi Yossi, for sure we have answered our question. Why? How do we answer our question? What does that have to do with our sugya? Because when this guy says umufer lechi, he's not saying it should be after the hakama. This was why it's so important the way the Ran explained the Gemara's question, understand what the Gemara is answering. It's rather at the same time. So therefore, hafar is going to take effect. Because his main thing that he was trying to show that should be hafar. That's why he says, I don't want hakama to be if hafar cannot be. But then we were saying, but wait a second, the guy first said hakama, then he said hafara. So maybe his intention was also that there can't be hafara unless it's hakama. It's not hakama, so it shouldn't be hafara. He's saying, no. Rabbi Yossi, he says when you say two things, Temuras Oila, Temuras Shlamim, of course it's going to be Temuras Shlamim. The fact that you say Oila first before Shlamim is not saying it should be this, then that. It's just that you can't say two words at the same time. So it's like you said it at the same time. Oh, so I'm doing hakama and hafar at the same time. It's not hakama should be a prerequisite for hafar. And okay, hakama will not take effect because, like we said, you can have both. And if hafar is going to take effect, which it will be, then hakama is not going to be. The fact that you said hakama first, according to Rabbi Yossi, is not such an important principle. Now, the Ran just has a question. He says, wait a second. If you're going to say, even so, how could it take effect? This is a little bit more complex. The Gemara is going to shortly come out and end the daf with a principle that says, whatever is not bezeh chazeh, whatever cannot be one after the other, then even at the same time cannot be. So if you tell me that if you first try to do hakama and then hafara, then hafara would not take effect because hakama is not taking effect because, like we said, the man of shach hakama cannot take effect because it's dependent on the hafara. So then how could it even take effect when you're saying it at the same time? You're saying that because you're saying it at the same time it's not a prerequisite. So but how does that work if it cannot be bezeh chazeh? He says that's not a question at all. He says because over here that the hakama is not ma'akev the hafara, because he's stipulating and he's saying that the hakama should not take effect. So therefore, according to Rabbi Yossi, partial hafara is going to take effect because he's saying that the hakama should not get in the way of the hafara, and he wants the hafara to get in the way of the hakama. So according to Rabbi Yossi, there's no question. But the Gemara goes one step further and says, Vafila Reb Meir. Even according to Reb Meir, we could also answer the question and say that even though over there, when you say Temuras Oila, Temuras Shlam, so you're saying Temuras Shlam after Temuras Oila. And what do we say for a mayor? It's not going to take effect. So you would think, also here in our question, that okay, the hafara cannot take effect. Remember, our question was only on the hafara. In this interesting case of when you're saying this kaim lechi, mufa lechi, and the hakama should not take effect unless you have a hafara. So we were saying, according to Rabbi Yossi, okay, it's going to take effect because, yeah, it's like if that was l'kach neskav metchila, it's like you're saying it at the same time. It's not a prerequisite beforehand. So the Gemara is saying that no, even according to a mayor, who you would think, okay, he says when you say two words, it's the first one, not the second one. When you say Temuras Oila, Temuras Shlam, it's going to be Oila, not both of them. So seemingly then in our case, if you said Kayim Lechi, then Mufa Lechi, then just like Hakama is not taking effect, but that's the first one. Hafara is not going to take effect. Says the Gemara, no. Even according to Meir, loy kamar, he didn't say his halacha, and the gears of the Bach is elo deloy amar, only when he didn't say, loy techel zu, elam ken chalazu, that this one shouldn't take effect, unless this one didn't take effect. Meaning, in the case of Tmuras Shlam, you didn't say any such terminology. So, okay, we'll go based on the first thing that you say. But over here is different. Why? Because since the Amar, he says, Loi teichel hakama. Remember, that was the last part of this interesting phraseology this guy's taking for his nether. He says, Loi teichel hakama, I don't want the hakama to take effect. Elam kein chala afara, unless the afara takes effect. So he revealed his intention that his primary particularity was on the afara, not the hakama. So therefore, when he says umufalechi, it's not after the hakama, because how could it take effect afterwards? Because it's not possible for the hakama to take effect, and therefore says the Gemara, in that case, Rameh is going to also agree that the hafara is going to take effect, because he's saying it's dependent on the hafara. You're saying because I said it first, therefore Meir says you go based on the first thing that you say. Yeah, but he's saying I don't want it to be if the second thing's not going to be. So there he would also agree that the second thing would take priority. Now the Ran has a question. He says, if you're going to say, why don't we say that even according to a Meir, a different chiluk? We only said over there because, as the Gemara there actually explains, you should have said, and we mentioned this from the Ram in passing beforehand, you should have said Tmuras Oila Vishlamim, but you said an extra word. You said Tmuras Oila Tmuras Shlamim. So that's like as if you're saying that let this one take effect and let this one take effect, as the Gemara says over there. But over here, where there's no extra terminology, so then fakir, that's taking effect at the same time. You didn't say anything extra. The whole reason why Meir says over there is because you said the extra word Tmuras. So it's like, okay, this, then that. Because why do you say that word? You should have said Tmuras Oila Vishlam. Then it would have been all together. And then Rameh agrees with it altogether, then it's also the second thing, not only the first thing. So what does that have to do with our sugi over here? Says the Ran, no, lav milsi. That's not a question. He says, because we understand over there, because since it's possible that the Tmuras Oila and Shlam could take effect at the same time, it could be both, because you could sell it and use half its proceeds as a Shlam and half an Oila. So wherever there's no extra words, we would say it means at the same time. But over here, you can't have a common afar to take effect at the same time. So then even without any extra wording, we would say that your intention is for one after the other, if not for the fact, as our Gemara is explaining, that you stipulated and you said that it will not come to be unless you have hafara. So again, those words would be the primary indicator of why Rameh would agree that, yes, usually the first thing would be then the second thing. But over here, you said, I don't want the first thing to be unless you have the second thing. So even Rameh would agree. In our case, so everyone, not only Rabbi Yosef, but even Rameh would agree that afara would take effect. And everyone understands hakama is not going to take effect, as we explained from the Rambam Mon of Shach, because if afara is taking effect, you can't have hakama, you can't have both. You can't be both mufra and make him like frozen, you know. And you can't. And if afara doesn't take effect, of course the hakama is not going to take effect, because he said, I don't want hakama unless there's afara. So if there's no afara, there's no hakama. The whole question was regarding hafara, and we're saying that not only according to Rabbi Yosef that says we go based on both things that you're saying, so hafara can take effect even though hakama is not, but even according to Meir, who usually says we go based on the first thing, not the second thing, he would agree that since you're stipulating it should be dependent on the second thing is like the first thing, and therefore hafar will take effect. One final point, the Gemara says, another final question, Bayi Rabba or Rava. Let's say he says, Kayim umufr lechi. He says, I'm being Mekayim, I'm being Mefer, and he does this bevas achas. In other words, that the Kayim on its own is nothing. And the lechi that he's saying is including both of them together at the same time, because he didn't say kayim. If you say the word kayim, kayim means nothing. He didn't say kayim lechi mufa lechi. The word lechi is the one that says to you. So he says kayim umufer lechi. So that's obviously together. So the question is, mahu, what would the halacha be? So the Ran explains that the Gemara's question is, most definitely, obviously, both of them cannot take effect at the same time. You can't be both mukuyim and mufr in your neder. But the question is that, do you say that, yes, but one of them is coming before the other one, meaning if one would be for the other one wouldn't take effect. Here, when you're saying it at the same time, so regarding each one we say that it's the first one, And we could also say that maybe it's the second one. Now, since you can't have both to be at the same time, we're mesupik. And since we're not sure, well, we would go stringently and say, well, maybe. They can't be both at the same time. But you're saying at the same time. So one has to be first. So since we don't know, we'll say, maybe Hakama came first. And therefore you cannot be Mefer anymore. That's the question. Would you say that, or do you say that no? Since it can't be both at the same time, so then it's nothing. Or you say, no, we just don't know which one. So then we have to be Machmer and say that maybe Hakama is first. Says you want Tashma out to Raya, and this is the final principle, Dama Rabba. Rabba says that, he says this in Perikish Makadish regarding if someone's Makadish, two sisters at the same time. So Rabba says, no, there's no Kedushin. Why not? Because Kol Davar She'ein B'Zeach Hazeh, anything that cannot be one after the other, you cannot be Makadish one sister after another sister. So then the halacha is, Afil B'Vas Achas Einar, then even at the same time, is not going to be, in other words, we don't say that each one of them has a Sabbath Kedushin. Maybe she's the first one. And maybe each one has to be, you have to be Megarish them out of Suffolk. No, they're not going to have any Kedushin. Why not? Maybe whichever one is first. No, because if you cannot do it one after the other, we say when you do it at the same time, that has no effect in this way, because they're all happening at the same time. And that can't be, because you wouldn't have it one after the other. And each one is, you don't say that that's maybe the first one. You say that it's not going to take effect. So therefore here also, there's no Suffolk by Hakam and Afar at all. And therefore it's like you didn't do anything. And it was this totally sterile statement that you said. And therefore you'd be able to subsequently be made for Mekaiman, however it is that he wants, I think, to any time for hosting us.